The talk of the town. Life stories from the people who lived them. The story of Errol Simister.
I was born December the 5th, 1939, in Kendal. I was named after Errol Flynn, who was a famous film star. Now, he didn't come from America. He was born in Tasmania. But my second name, Harback, it came from my father's mother's maiden name. But of course, I have no choice of my names ever. But Simister, it goes back quite a long while. My dad came from Oldham, and my mum was a Warrington girl. And in 1929, he had a daughter. That was my sister, Audrey. And then 1939, I came along. And the war had just started. I didn't move to Preston till I was 4 with my parents. And I lived in Preston for 19 years. And I began going to school, I think it was January 1945. And of course, I didn't know there was a war on, too young. Bear in mind there was food rationing was still on, but I wasn't a meat eater. So for Sundays, breakfast I'd have jam butties, and for lunch I'd have mashed potatoes and cabbage. Anyway, so I began school at 5. It was called Roebuck Street, County Primary School. And it was just an ordinary, a junior and a senior school. And you won't believe this. My mum took me to school, and at 10:30, I ran home from school, about 6-minute walk. Anyway, at lunchtime, my mum took me back. Not like today when children are fetched in the cars. Some come on buses, but very, very few people, children, walk to school now. Anyway, so I went through school. When I was about 8 or 9, I just got my second set of teeth, front teeth. And of course, being a young lad, hands stuffed in my short pants pockets, and some big lads run into me and knocked me flying. And I fell down on my face. I couldn't get my hands out of my pockets, and I smashed all my front teeth. My gums were bleeding, and the headmaster said, "Do you want to go home, son?" I said, "No, sir." So I hung on till lunchtime, went home. My mum was in, came back to school, but it was just an accident. Couldn't do nothing about it. So that was my first accident at school. And then I can tell you the date, December 17th, 1952, I was in woodwork class in the morning, and I was working on a wood bench, and outside there were gales blowing, and the gales blew the chimney stack through the roof onto yours truly. And so it's a miracle I'm talking to you. They reckon there was about 2,500 weight of Accrington brick fell on me, but with the workbench being so sturdy, a lot of it was deflected off me. But I was in hospital 3 weeks with a fractured skull. I've got a blue line there. That's the result of that accident. Of course, the school, the infants and the seniors, closed for the day. And I was off school until just after Easter, 1953. And when I went back to school, I said, "Oh, by the way, I paid for my dinner money Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, and I didn't get my dinners because I was in hospital, and the teacher says, nothing wrong with your brain. And my final report was I was 13th out of 27, so I was an average kind of pupil, and I was there for 10 years. The school wasn't affiliated to any church. It was built in 1907, and I went to its 100th anniversary in 2007. And then when I was 15, I started work at Leyland Motors, and that's the only job I ever had. Very, very big place. Built a lot of trucks and buses. I was on machines. You start at 15, and gradually I went through the system as an apprentice, and they had what they call a Leyland Day Continuation School, and I attended that. And then when I was 21, I came out of my time as a skilled turner, but I didn't like turning, so I was put on spline grinding, where you were helping to make the gearbox components for the trucks. Quite big things they were. So I did that for quite a number of years. I lost my mum early on with cancer. I was only 26, and I'd lost my dad when I was 22 in 1962. I got married in 1963, and Sylvia's on that photograph just over there. She's with her sister there. That's on the, do you know where the lake, the ferry across the lake goes? It pulls up on cables. Lovely memories. Buying a static caravan at Beetham with my wife in 2001, and prior to that, going abroad, Mallorca 3 times, Malta twice, Austria twice, Tenerife once, and it was really nice. I mentioned about a caravan we had, which we bought in 2001. That became our main holidays. But we still went, even though it was a brand new van, we still managed to go to Llandudno on the train. But we used to go to Grange over Sands. But unfortunately, in 1966, with no children, she overdosed and had to go into, eventually, Whittingham Hospital. And she was there for a couple of months, and then they said they could perform what they call a leucotomy on her, where they push needles into your brain and pass an electric current through. Sounds very barbaric. Anyway, it just didn't work. So that was 1966, 1967, back in hospital again, until 1968. Then she was able to come home. I had to take her tablets to work with me. But eventually, she got a little part-time job. This is before we had my son. So we was able to have holidays in the car and that. And it were all very nice. I've got very happy memories. I was never into sports. I was rubbish at football, rubbish at cricket, But the one sport I was good at was cycling, and I absolutely loved cycling. It got me fit, and when I was just turned 19, I cycled it from Preston to Keswick, and it was bitterly cold. Snow discs were on, and when I got there, the warden said, "What are you going to do for your tea?" I said, "I'll have to go and find a cafe in Keswick." He says, "Well, if you like, you can have some lunch with us." My wife's made a hot pot, about 5 o'clock. By the way, this hostel, had 105 beds. Only 5 people stayed that night. Absolutely bitterly cold, no central heating. And then 12 months after that, I was still with the hostels, and I cycled from Preston all the way to York. It was warmer weather then, and I remember cycling through Leeds. They still had the trams running during the final year. So I really enjoyed cycling. But when I was 19, my mum said, "Don't get a motorbike," because I'd suffered a fractured skull. I said, "No, Mum," I said, "I'm going to get a moped." So, being 19, my dad had to sign guarantor, and this moped cost £67. When I was younger, the radio and the cinema was part of daily life. I used to go to the Saturday matinees, the Empress in Preston. It was only about a 5-minute walk from home. And you'd see all the cartoons, and then the main feature would be a Western. But I loved the cinema. Even after we got the television, we got a television 1954. It was a Sobel, but it must have been on terms. But in those days, they used to cheat a little bit. Instead of saying pounds, they'd say guineas. You'd buy things. Or you think 67 guineas isn't much, but in reality, it's over £70. But yeah, the cinema, I love going to the cinema. Loved it with my mum and my sister. One of the best films I saw was Cruel Sea with Jack Hawkins. I think that was made about 1953. And then another film, favourite film, which I wrote about in the Evening Post, was Ice Cold in Alex, starring John Mills, Sylvia Sims, Anthony Quayle and John Mills both got knighted, and Harry Andrews. It tells the story of a North African desert. But the main star of the film was, of course, Katie, the ambulance. Yeah, fantastic film, that. But later on in the film, they had to cross this big sand dune of a hill, and the only way they could do it was by taking the spark plugs out, putting it into low gear, cranking the handle, which on the film set, they did that, but in reality, they were cheating. They had a big Scammer recovery truck with a cable off camera, so that winched it up. Yeah, a fantastic film. John Mills was a fantastic actor, and Anthony Quayle was. Well, when they got him back into Alexandria, there's a couple of me being a techno freak. It's supposed to be 1942, 43. But in the background, on the back projection, you can see a Morris Minor and a Land Rover. They forgot to remove them, because they weren't around in 1943. That was all in my letter, which they printed in the Evening Post. I didn't have my first pint of beer till I was about 19, but all my life I could go with my friends. I never went on my own. Have a pint of beer, or I could leave it alone. It never got on top of me, and I was never a smoker. I mean, nowadays, cigarettes must be about, I don't know, £12 a pack. Unbelievable. Lots of people drink beer at home now because it's far cheaper. All my life, I've got great pleasure out of reading. Even when I was about 11, I used to like reading just William books and then Rupert books. All my life, I've enjoyed people's life stories. And the best one I ever read was Norman Wisdom's life story. And he had a very hard life. His dad was a chauffeur, and when he came home from school, if he'd done something wrong, his father used to pick him up, throw him against the wall. And this happened a long time. His mother couldn't stand it, and instead of taking the boys away from a violent father, she left them with him. And this is Norman Wisdom's life story. A real colourful character, and a good singer in the end. Made a lot of films, comedy films. In 1930, he joined the army, and he was posted out to India. Did a bit of boxing. He learnt to play every instrument: piano, trumpet, saxophone. A wonderful fella, Norman Wisdom. Norman Wisdom. Thinking about Norman Evans then. That's an old character. You'll have to Google him. So I've read many autobiographies. That's just one of them. Unfortunately, about 1984, I began to suffer a lot of hernia problems, and I ended up going in hospital, having a long time off work, recovering. One time I had a double hernia, and the doctor said not to drive for 6 months. So I was at home convalescing. But eventually, after 30 years, I'd suffered a breakdown, and I realised I could go on the bottom rung of the Leyland Motors, well, it was Leyland Bus pension scheme. So that's what I did. So I left work, and I thought, well, I've got to do something, because I was reasonably active. So I joined the Friends of the British Commercial Vehicle Museum in Leyland as a volunteer, and then in 1992 I took on the post of membership secretary, all unpaid of course, and then about 4 years later they had a vending machine. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll set up a cafe and I'll run it voluntary, and that's what I did. And for the first year, I made about £400 profit for the museum. And then the manager says, what we need to do is put the microwave in. So we did that, and I ran the cafe for quite a few years, and then I was a membership secretary, and so I was a volunteer there for 32 years until 2022. For many, many years, I used to write to the Evening Post on different subjects: nostalgia, railways, transport, mopeds, things I'd done. They printed every single one. And I'll give you an example. Talking about going to Gretna Green on an NSU quickly, 200 mile there and back. And that was a hell of an achievement for a little bike. I had a few motorbikes, but nothing big. My last bike was a little Bantam, and my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, went to Conway on it, and it was only 150cc, and we knocked on the door in this house in Conway. I've got 2 single rooms, and the lady said, no, we've got 1 single room, but if you don't mind being in the lounge on a camp bed and get up early. Oh, I said, I'm up every day at 6:30. That won't be a problem. So we had a little gentle tour around North Wales on that, went into Anglesey, and then we came back to Llanberis. It was a very hot summer's day. Little Bantam only had 3 gears. And we got within 100 yards of the summit, and there was an almighty screech from the engine. The engine seized up. So we pushed the bike to the summit, and then we freewheeled down the underside. And when we got to the bottom, and it turned over, it was free. And I got a phone call from them saying, we do like your articles. But when COVID came in, they couldn't pick any mail up. So that was the end of that. But all my letters got published. So I've enjoyed being a bit of an author, you know. My wife suffered a minor stroke in 2007, but after 8 days in hospital, she was allowed to come home, and she said, there's a lot of jobs. I said, look, love, you do the jobs you can, and what you can't do, I'll do. So that lasted, and then, unfortunately, in 2014, she suffered a fall outside our house in Bamber Bridge. She had a Zimmer, and her legs must have given way, or she just fell over, and she was on the floor. And I'd just come in from the laundrette, because at that time, believe it or not, we had no washing machine. So we helped her to pick her up. The ambulance came, taken into hospital, and after 5 weeks, we had to find her a care home, and we found one in Longbridge for her. The first one was Alston Park View Nursing Home, a lovely home, and she was there about 16 months. I used to go and visit her every day. She was in a wheelchair, and I could take her out in the car to a little pub and got a cup of tea. Then she transferred to Walton House, which was better for me. It had top-up fees of about £200 a month. But my wife and me, we always enjoyed travel, and we had a lovely caravan in Beetham. It was 32 foot long, 12 foot wide. But when my wife had these falls and she was in hospital, I had to make the decision to sell the caravan. So the site manager said, well, I'll give you your £500 deposit back and I'll find you a dealer, buy it off you. So I had no option but to accept their offer. And I got offered £1,500 for it. Bear in mind the caravan cost 19 grand. So I got 2 grand back. But then, because it was site owned, I had to pay £750 disconnection fee plus that. So that 2 grand became 1,100. But we all know very well that caravan, it hadn't got central heating, but it was in tip-top condition, tip-top condition. But my wife said, why are we to sell the caravan? I said, well, look, love, I can't push in a caravan in a wheelchair. So it was very, very sad to accept that, but it was just the only thing I could do. Unfortunately, my wife was a smoker all her life, and I used to say to her, I wish I could pack up smoking, love. But she said, I just can't. I said, well, I just have to accept it. And she was smoking until maybe about 10 days before she passed away on March 25th, 2017. And we've been together 53 years. I'm Church of England, by the way. To be quite honest, until my wife passed away, I didn't go. But after I'd lost my wife, I used to go every week to St Saviour's in Bamber Bridge. And I found it a comfort, yeah. Even Christmas 2024, my son took me to St Saviour's and had a service. Of course, I was in my wheelchair, but I could get in my son's car. I think that was the last time I've been to church. These are milestones in my life. In 2020, they found out I got bowel cancer. Went into hospital. This was during COVID. I had the operation performed by the consultant, but he was controlling a robot, so it was keyhole surgery. And I was in hospital about 6 days, and then I could come home. Took a little while to recover, but I was doing all right. I could walk about. But 12 months after the bowel operation, I had to go for a scan. And they found out that through my blood systems, it had transferred to my liver. So I had to go to Blackburn Infirmary for that. My son took me. I walked in and I saw this lady consultant. And she said, I'll be performing the operation today. I said, thank you. But I'd seen her before on previous visits. And unfortunately, while I was in theatre, I suffered 2 strokes. So I was in intensive care for a few more days. And after being in a coma 2 days, the staff pushed the television in front of me. It was the Queen's Diamond Jubilee of 2022. Anyway, I transferred from that to a stroke unit, but I couldn't do anything. The nurses had to blend me food and tell me what it was. I mean, the care was excellent. Then they transferred me to a unit at Nelson, of all places. That's a long way from Bombay Ridge. I had 2.5 weeks in Blackburn, 2.5 weeks in Nelson, then I spent 5 weeks in Chorley. But I found out I could only walk around with a Zimmer. Initially, I had to ask for bedpans, and then they could take me to the toilet in a wheelchair, stand me up and sit down, give me a buzzer when I'd finished. So slowly, I was getting my strength back. And then after 5 weeks in Chorley, I was allowed to come home. But I could walk around the house with my Zimmer. I could go outside in my son's car. I couldn't drive anymore, so I sold my car. But up until 3 weeks ago, I was reasonably all right. And then I came into hospital as a result of this fall. And I was in Chorley, and now I'm transferred to this nursing home. I'm not in any pain. I can feed myself to a point. People in the home, they pay me a compliment. They say, "You're so lovely, Errol." I mean, that's nice, isn't it? So very nice. And I've got friends and relatives coming to see me very regularly. And I couldn't be in a better place. But unfortunately, I realise I can't go home. This is my home. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the interview, friends, with Ken and Dawn, not forgetting Snowy the cat. Well, that brings us up to date, so you've had a bit of a pocket history of Errol Simister.
Errol Simister was interviewed by Ken Moss and Dawn Rees on the 18th of April 2025 in Chorley, Lancashire. Music was performed by the Grimethorpe Colliery Band, with additional music from Ice Cold in Alex by Leighton Lucas. The programme was produced by Maverick Productions.